So short and tucked has been the mantra for gravel bikes for the last 5 years. However, I do think we're going to see a sea change in the next couple of years, and this bike by Mark Mahall is a good kind of crystal ball into the future. In this video, I sit down and interview Mark, and we talk about why long is going to be the new tucked.
Yeah.
So tell me about this beautiful looking purple beast here.
Yeah, so this is the third bike of the Mahall Expedition series. The Expedition geometry is kind of takes it to the next level beyond a competitive gravel geometry. This is the long bike concept, longer chainstays, room for plus size tires, but the front end geometry, steering geometry still keeps the bike snappy. It's fun to ride, but still provides some seriousness for bike packers, multi-day, multi-week trips.
Tell me about the fork. Did you design the fork as well, or?
This was a fork that Cameron Sanders and I worked with Ren Sports on.
Yeah.
So this was a prototype. It's the tall gravel fork geometry, 425 axle to crown geometry. It's a emerging industry standard. It appears.
You mentioned earlier that it's kind of a longer bike, which is kind of against it's a typical industry standard for a gravel bike. Why go long, and how long is it exactly?
So the chainstays are 500 millimeters at the extreme of the sliders.
Okay.
A number of years ago, I started lengthening chainstays out for clients of the more competitive builds, and they all loved it. And so it was like, why not go a little longer? So Cameron Sanders came along and said, let's go like over 500. So we did 535. There were some things we didn't like about that. It would tend to get high centered, and we just felt that was a little bit too long, so we moved it back to 485 to 500 seems to be the right choice. I mean, the obvious reason is to get more tire clearance.
Okay.
We're using a 68 millimeter shell, sometimes a 73, a 12 by 148 axle. So it definitely helps on tire clearance, but it really stabilizes the ride. Riders of this tell me that the descents are amazing. The bike is super stable on descents. I've got clients that are PRing descents.
Oh, wow.
It climbs well, and I'm going to predict in a couple of years we're going to say 485 or 500 isn't all that long. Yeah.
Like one of the first kind of at least quasi-production longer chainstay bikes I've seen was the Ritchie Outback.
Yes.
And that was long for the conventional gravel bike, and that was pleasantly surprised with that. So
Correct.
I do think more people are going to experiment with that.
I do too. The competitive gravel bikes can only take you so far because of tire clearance, and usually the handling of those is relatively snappy. They're for gravel racing. So there's an emerging gravel thing going on, so it's kind of a split, just like there was in fat bikes a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And so this fills a niche. People still looking for a fun bikepacking build that isn't a fat bike, isn't a mountain bike, so it's still optimized for those longer rides, and it keeps it fun. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the front end geometry. You said that you wanted to keep it relatively responsive. What's the trail, the head tube angle, and all that stuff?
For me, it's all about trail. My competitive gravel bikes, the trail is anywhere from 63 to 68 millimeters. It depends on what the rider wants to do with the bike. And on the expedition builds, they're going to be between 68 and 72. So 72 puts it out where like the old school 29ers were 10 or 15 years ago, and so I matched up that geometry. Seemed to work really well for something like this. And I would pull it back to about 68 if someone wasn't going to do a lot of bike packing. They wanted to use it for all around gravel.
Yeah.
So what I find in that kind of geometry, we don't get a lot of wheel flop. The wheel isn't managing the rider, even at slow speeds, and it still stays in control. It's a really good slow speed bike, but people can get wild with it also.
Were your first gravel bikes this long in the rear, or were they more
They
traditional?
were not. My very first was a cyclocross gravel hybrid built in 2012. It had chainstays of 435. And it's been reconfigured a couple times. It's out to 455 now.
Yeah.
I try to talk clients out of chainstays any shorter than 440 for a competitive build.
Right.
It just stabilizes the ride so much better. There's really no downside.
I guess what are kind of the misconceptions you think people have with a long rear end?
They obviously think it's slower. I think it's the industry has trained people, unfortunately, to think shorter is better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not going to do criterions with this kind of bike, although I'd love to see people do it, right? But so yeah, my intent is to just build a bike for the purpose that the rider is going after. I haven't had anyone tell me that the chainstays are too long or the bike is slow. One of my other clients, Brittany, she used this for 3 weeks, and I just let her talk to me when she brought it back. Hey, what do you think? Downside? And her chainstays are about 450. She noticed almost no difference between hers and this. The nice thing about a longer bike is the rider is pretty well stable in the cockpit. They can sit down, they can stand up, they can shift their weight back and forth, and the bike is pretty much going to hang on and do the right thing. The big advantage to a bike packer, if you're in the saddle for 6 hours plus, it's nice to get to the point where you just sort of forget about the bike, and so the bike's going to take care of a rider like that. It's not going to manage the rider. It's going to be relatively comfortable as you can be on multi-day 6-hour days or 8-hour days. Yeah.
Tell me about the handlebars. These look new.
They are. So this is the first Wren steel bikepacking bar, and we're going to build a couple more of these. So it's a steel bar. The big loop is nice to get out in front, kind of in a more aero position. We're still debating how wide to go, how long to go. The width seems to be about right, and we're looking forward to seeing what people think of this bar. This is a really nice bar for someone who doesn't want to drop bar. I'm a big fan of the Jones bar, and so this is a little different take on the Jones bar. And not everyone can ride a Jones bar.
Yeah.
So this is another bar to try out.
So what got you into building bikes?
It was initially just an attempt to get away from the big factory brands, the corporate brands, and do kind of my own thing.
Yeah.
I'm hard to fit on a bicycle, so figured, we'd just go start building bikes. And my wife is about 5 foot tall.
Okay.
And she wanted a bike that looked like it was made for an adult. So she was my first client.
Yes.
Yeah. And the original plan was just to build for myself, family and friends. And after 4th or 5th frame, friends started lining up and asking for them. And I formed a company about that time. Cool. 2013.
Is there any bikes that you've ridden that has inspired the bikes that you create?
I had a number of data points. Around 2009, I started riding gravel pretty seriously. I was done with mountain bike racing by that time. Decided I was going to do mainly gravel racing, and by 2010, about half my training miles were off-road. And the mountain bikes I was using were actually poor data points, but those led to some optimizations. And the 2 cyclocross bikes I rode were pretty good on gravel, and so I decided to optimize cyclocross bikes for gravel racing rather than trying to mess with mountain bikes.
So there's a hot debate in our YouTube comments all the time that gravel bikes are just cyclocross bikes, but it sounds like for you, the cross geometry was a starting off point. Like, what is the difference for you in terms of a cross bike and a competitive gravel bike?
For me, obviously I like the longer chainstays. I think that's good for the rider. I like a lower bottom bracket, and the steering geometry is really key for me. Somewhere around the mid-60s for a trail. But yeah, the big thing between the cyclocross and my competitive gravel bikes would be the bottom bracket height and the chainstay length.
Yeah. Was there anything unique or different in the tubing that you selected for this bike?
I like Reynolds 631 quite a bit, so I've been doing that on just about any of the bikepacking and gravel bikes. And then the Columbus chainstays I like a lot. The Columbus Zona mountain bike stays. The seat stays are a custom design that I did, something I found out soon after I solved how do I get big tires with a 6 to 8 millimeter shell, I started seeing limitations of the seat stays. And I like the slender, sleek seat stays like that, and there wasn't anything on the market. So I worked with Bike Fab Supply in Arizona to come up with a custom design, and he may end up offering this design as a standard product.
Right. Yeah. What are the plans for this design, to take it semi-production or just still do one-offs as they come in?
We'll see what the response is. I'd like to do batches of 4,
yeah.
Probably a batch of 4 per year. I can only do 4 to 6
yeah.
max anyway. So a batch of 4 will keep it fun without getting too stressful. If the response is greater than that, we've got some sources within the U.S. to do under contract, both TIG welding and fillet brace frames. So that would probably be the next step before we go offshore.
Yeah, I'm super excited to ride it. I've been really curious about the rear longer chainstay geometry, especially most recently, and I do think it's going to be an upcoming trend that we're going to see in future production bikes. I mean,
I do too.
Like you said, like everyone's been conditioned, shorter is better. There have been some outliers, and I think once more people actually get to try a longer chainstay bike, it might change some opinions. And
some of the opinions were formed, really long chainstays, but the steering geometry was really slack. So I think it was the steering geometry that gave the long chainstays a bad rap.
Also, I think like usually when you would see a long chainstay, it would be on a full-blown touring bike.
Correct.
So you never had that combination of long rear and maybe a little bit livelier kind of tubing, or just not a boat anchor.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark, for coming by and dropping off the bike.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. This was fun.
Yeah. And be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out Mahall Bike.
Mahall.
Check out Mahall Bikes. What's the website again?
MahallBikeworks.com.
And as always, everybody, keep the sulfur side down.